So there are several things to consider whenever you're thinking about delivery method. But if I was to try to sum it up for you and make it easier, really what you want to think about is how much hands-on practice and live coaching and feedback do your learners need? So, for example, things that are tactical and that they've got to do in person would probably be things like forklift driving, putting out a fire, right? And so you know that there's going to have to be some type of instructor coach there, right? To see how they actually turn it. But there are pieces of that instruction that could be online, right? So for instance, anything that is the information that they can learn and practice online before they get to the instructor led. Sort of like when you're thinking about like a flipped classroom, you're thinking about putting the lecture first and then they come and ask the questions. But in corporate training, it is kind of like, what is that knowledge that they need in order to practice the skills in person? And so that's how you can think about a blended approach. And then also for the instructor-led trainings, like how much of that real-time feedback do they need? For e-learning, then you won't, if it's something where you know that people can practice and get enough feedback. So for instance, things like some skills that you could build through scenario practice. So maybe how to handle difficult conversations or how to overcome objections, right? So you can build that as e-learning or instructor-led training, but how you make the decision between the two has to do with various things like what are the constraints, what are the budgets, how many learners are there, and what's kind of like the timeline that you can get it done. And so you can imagine, right, if you have 1,000 learners, you have a small budget and they're spread out all over the globe, then you want to focus your development on e-learning. And then of course, you know, if it is a hands-on activity, well, then it might be a hybrid, right? Like how much can you do in e-learning to cut down on costs? And then what parts have to be instructor-led training in order for them to be able to drive the forklift, put out the fire, and do the type of mechanical, tactical things that they need to do on the job. And so it's thinking about things like that that help you kind of make that decision for what is the best way to deliver your instruction. And then the other things to consider is maybe it's not e-learning, maybe it's not instructor-led training, maybe it's not even virtual instructor-led training. If somebody can perform the task just by having a step-by-step guiding for them or a checklist, right? And those are things that can be workbooks, they could be technical guides, they could be job aids, they could be quick reference guides. And those are things that can also solve problems. And you'll decide on those if you have a small budget, you know that somebody doesn't need to practice and get feedback because, say, for instance, if it's if you give them a job aid on how to do a thing in software, well, the feedback is whether it works in the software or not, right? And so in that instance, just giving somebody a step-by-step guide with pictures, that would be sufficient. It would save money. And there's multiple different ways to disperse that information. And so that's just another thing to consider. It's not always a full course if it can be solved with something small like a guide. The biggest obstacles for learners has to do, there's several things that we could probably talk about when we're talking about, you know, what's standing in our learners' way. But I think the thing that we all have to put at the forefront of our mind has to be accessibility, right? We have to think about those learners first, as well as they have some of the biggest obstacles, right? So for them, it might not be something like distractions or motivation or purpose or any of that kind of stuff. It might just be the way that we deliver the course content has to be a way that they can actually learn from, right? So maybe they need closed captions, or maybe they need something with an audio to be read to them, or maybe it has to be in a certain color scheme so that they can see what it is that you're presenting to them. And so that I would think that would be the first thing that we want to consider as far as obstacles to our learners is accessibility. And then from underneath that, I'll think about the other things that are obstacles to our learners. Like I've just kind of listed a few of them, right? The distractions. I mean, this is something that we all are challenged with, and probably even more so for your learners, and even more so for learners that are in a work setting, right? So they're in a work setting, they've got this meeting they've got to go to, they've got this job that they've got to do, and they're required to learn this training in order to perform their job better. And so that's a lot of pulling in different directions. And so how can you help your learners remove distractions? So maybe even just reminding them to turn off their distractions. The other things that are obstacles for learners might be their motivation. And that might be a motivation like, oh no, not another training. Or maybe they don't see the value that this course or training has for them specifically and their role. So really just being clear about what's in it for them, for your learners. The other thing is they don't, I guess this ties more into like what's in it for me, but really just connecting. A lot of times the content of a course does not get connected to the real world. And so that can be unmotivating for your learners. And then also, besides accessibility and all those other things, is you want your learners to be able to see themselves in the story. And so that might mean, including a diversity of images and trying to find different ways to include the different types of learners that you have in even the way that you illustrate your course content, right? So that they know like, oh, that could be me. And the way that you tell stories can bring people in and make it so relatable. So it's even beyond just the what's in it for me, but writing stories that are truly relatable to your learners can overcome some obstacles as well. And those are the top ones that I just kind of think of off the top of my head as far as like what stands in our learners' way. Accessibility, motivation, seeing diversity, and then also just their attitude. If you're getting conflicting information from your stakeholders, something in your process has gone awry. Either multiple stakeholders are submitting the similar training request to the same form, right? That's coming into your department. And so you have kind of conflicting opinions as far as what the training should be or what they want you to start looking into to create training for. Or you haven't done a full kickoff meeting where you have been able to iron out what exactly it is. And even if we're thinking about say we're in the kickoff meeting and you notice that the different stakeholders have different opinions about what this training is about, that's actually the time when you might whip out the action mapping that comes from Kathy Moore and get your stakeholders to talk about maybe not even like what the course is about, but more about getting them to agree what is the business challenge or that business change that they want to see. What's the behavior change that they want to see in their employees? And I think when you can focus on that, then you can get them to focus on the same outcome, right? If he says, oh, I want you to teach your salespeople about how to overcome objections, and the other stakeholders like, no, it's all about getting more leads and following up, right? You could see that as a conflict in like different opinions about what the content is. But really what you want to find is what it is that they agree on. Okay, so what you want this course to be about is what you agree on, which is that you want to increase sales in the next quarter by this percentage. And you're saying that part of the way to do that is through handling objections. And you're saying that it's part of the way to do that is on increasing the amount of follow-ups with the leads that you're generating. And so I would say, great, it actually sounds like both of those things are in harmony, because those are two of the things that we know that salespeople have to practice and be able to do in order to raise, the sales at the end of the quarter. And so really you guys are both in alignment, even though it seems like conflicting, strategies. And so we can actually include both of those topics. So you see how when you get them to focus on what is the business goal or the business change, then it becomes a lot easier to find, the common ground, or even actually, how can we do both of what they want to reach those goals?